Hey everybody, welcome to today's free webinar. I host a live show every other Monday on my channel. If you are here live, welcome. The benefit of coming live is that you get to ask me questions live during the show and I will do my very best to answer them. So thank you so much for coming today. And we are going to be talking about the question that I know is on a lot of people's minds, and that is how to flip your classroom. Flipping your classroom is coming up a lot within education circles right now because people are using flipped classroom techniques to implement hybrid teaching. I'm going to show you how you can implement flipped classrooms no matter what type of teaching environment that you are currently in, but it is an effective way to implement a hybrid concurrent classroom. Today's show is sponsored by annotate.net. They're definitely reaching the top of my list right now of my top favorite Google Chrome extensions. I use it all the time in my shows. Excited to be partnered with them. Annotate allows you to draw all over any screen, and I'll also be showing you a cool new tool that they just added that allows you to also screen record and annotate a digital whiteboard all in one space and then share that with students. So they're definitely an up and coming player in the education market, and thank you to Annotate for sponsoring this show. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about flipping your classroom today. I'm going to start off today by talking about why you would want to flip your classroom. Then I'll get into looking at some bigger picture structural ways that you might consider approaching a flipped classroom. And I'll close this out with a few tips, 5 or 6, that show you how you can implement a flipped classroom and just some things that I've learned about it to give you some pro tips. So before we get started, I'd love to hear in the chat so that I can answer these throughout the show. What are some questions that you have about flipped classrooms? So if you have never heard of it, I'd like to hear that as well. And if you just have a question that you want me to address during the show, be sure to drop that in. If I don't get to your question and it seems like I missed it, drop it in again, and I will make sure that I get to your question either in the middle of the show or at the end during the Q&A. So stick around. It's going to be a great show and informative, and I'm glad everybody could make it tonight. All right, so let's start here by talking about what a flipped classroom is not, rather than starting with what it is. So what it is not is just sitting students in front of a computer. So this is a massive misconception in general, I think, about what technology integration means. It does not mean just plopping a student in front of a computer, and that really does not do respect really to us in the education field, and the fact that in order to implement a flipped classroom well, you still have to have a highly skilled instructor who is orchestrating the whole situation. So we'll be talking about what that looks like in today's show. Just remember that, I know that there's some anxiety about like technology's role in education. In order to use technology well and to have it be effective, it requires skilled instruction, skilled educators. So always remember that if you ever are hearing people, freak out about, hey, technology is going to replace a teacher, it's not, because as we're going to see in this show today, it requires definitely high skilled instruction. Okay. So it is not plopping kids in front of a computer. So what is it? Flipping your classroom actually is an idea that was essentially invented by a couple of high school chemistry teachers back in 2012 or so, 2010, 2012. And their names are Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams. They actually have a book. I'll put that in the video description link for the recorded version of this video, where they wrote about this experience that they had making video tutorials of their lessons to reach students who could not be in class. And they discovered that, hey, this is actually an effective way of providing students with instruction. It opened up all this other class time for them to be able to do different things. So they kind of came up with this concept of a flipped classroom, which was also based on some previous concepts, of course, right? So they didn't fully invent it, but are credited with this notion of kind of coining the term flipped classroom. So the basic idea, right, in a sort of traditional model of flipping your instruction, the idea is that if in a regular traditional classroom where you're just teaching all your students all at the same time, all at once in a vertically planned lesson, you would typically have your direct instruction in class. You'd be teaching students new content in class. And then afterwards, what you would be doing is having them go outside of class, and they would be completing some practice activities, some application activities for homework. So the idea with flipping a classroom is that you are basically turning that on its head. Now, some people think that, oh, it just means that we're going to have students go learn things outside of class, but then in class, they're going to do some different activities. And although that is true, the key idea is that you're also turning the rigor upside down. So whereas, understanding new content, repetition, those are lower on Bloom's taxonomy of skills. And those might be skills that we're actually doing a lot with students in class, in person, in a more traditional model, and then having them apply those higher order thinking skills outside of class. The flip model is trying to flip that around so that students are doing the lower order thinking skills outside of class and then applying some higher order thinking in class. So if students have learned new material, then when they come outside of class and then when they come into class, they can do things like collaborate, they can work on projects, things like that. Now, I know something that I'm sure is coming up for a lot of people as I'm saying that right now are a couple of problems. Problem number one, what if students don't do homework, right? So I will be addressing that and talking about that a little bit today. And problem number two that is closely related, what if you, like me, actually don't give homework? Then how do you do this? So don't worry, it actually isn't so dependent on the idea of homework, although it's kind of traditionally conceived that way. Now people talk a lot about flipping your classroom in terms of an in-classroom flip, and I'll really be focusing on the in-classroom flip, but I will be giving you tips for how you can do it as well if you do want to kind of use this more traditional model where you're trying to push your instruction outside of class. So the basic idea, regardless of whether or not you're doing a outside of class flip or an in-person flip, is that you are taking that traditional model, you're turning it upside down, you're having students do some of the new content development, learning on their own independently, so that when you are all together, you can do activities that are practicing higher order thinking. Now, it's not just to be able to get students to collaborate and do projects and things like that. Flipping your classroom has a lot of other advantages. So I'll be showing you some models today where to help make clear how flipping your classroom can also really help with being able to give students more face time. So you can pull small groups, you can do intervention, you can run enrichment groups, you can pull students one-on-one when you have a large group of students doing some independent work. And it's also an effective way to be able to differentiate instruction, to build student autonomy. There are a lot of reasons why you would want to consider flipping your classroom, and it is absolutely an instructional strategy that I recommend you bring into your milieu of instructional strategies as you are building out your 21st century classroom. And we'll look at some specific ways that we can do it right now. So let's start here by looking at a couple of models of instruction. So this first one might look recognizable to you all if you watch my blended learning show. And there's a reason for that. So flipping your classroom is also a form of blended learning. And I'm focusing obviously here just on the in-classroom scenario. So let's look at what this might look like. So obviously I have here some students who are in person and some other students who are coming in remotely, just to show you kind of how that would be organized and what that would look like. So I have like my remote student here and I'm sorry, that's the opposite, my in-person and my remote student here. And what you'll notice over here is that essentially all of these students are doing self-paced work, right? And then over here, the teacher is working with some students that they are polling. Now, this is called flex instruction. Why? Because as the teacher, you have a lot of flexibility. So, you can be polling students into your group. however you see fit. So you're kind of moving students back and forth, bringing them in and providing them with some flexible instruction. Now, what I'll be talking about primarily in this show today is how to run this, how to make this self-paced work meaningful, and then also, what you would want to be doing when you're sitting here as the teacher. So why are you polling those students? What are you observing as you are looking on your computer? So this is one model for how it can work. Flex instruction, large majority of the class is running self-paced and you are polling students flexibly. Now, another one that I've been talking a lot about in recent shows and videos is stations-based learning. I put out a video a couple of weeks ago now about my top hybrid teaching tips, and one of them is to run stations. Stations are also just a great idea to bring into your instructional practices if you're teaching fully in person, and you could actually run them fully remote as well. And stations are also an effective way to implement a flipped classroom. So the idea with stations is that you might start here with some whole group. So you're going to kick off the lesson altogether, but then pretty quickly you're going to move into these different learning stations. So these are all essentially flipped stations, flipped activities where they're self-paced, students are learning new concepts. And in this model, this opens up the teacher space to be able to work with a small group to provide them with some direct instruction or potentially some intervention. Another option, you can also run stations where essentially you're just rotating around and kind of observing each station. And actually, if you're just kind of getting started with stations, that's what I would recommend doing. I'll talk about some of the challenges with stations as well in this show and how to address those. And also talk about what you can do kind of at the end. So I'll be emphasizing some of these, just the idea that flipping your classroom, as you can see actually in this model, doesn't require flipping it even for an entire class period. You could have a flipped section. This could be a flipped day or a couple of days, and then you can move into something where everybody is working on the same thing together, or it's a whole class activity, small group activity, whatever it is that you want to do. Okay, so these are two bigger kind of structural ways that we can implement flipped classroom in the classroom. Now, if you're doing it where you're trying to flip the classroom and it's more of just pushing assignments to students to do for homework, then obviously that can look any way you want it to look. But you are going to have to think differently about how you structure your class if you're going to do the in-classroom flip. And I would highly recommend, particularly if you're in hybrid concurrent, that you're using one of these two models as opposed to trying to just teach everybody pacing at the same time, which is quite difficult. Okay, so let's get into some tips. So my first tip, if you are going to flip your classroom, is to use hyperdocs. Now, the reason why you want to use hyperdocs is because a hyperdoc will, by its nature, essentially force you to construct a well-sequenced, well-put-together lesson. And I'm going to show you a couple models of what that could look like as well. So the idea is that when we have students over here in these self-paced lessons, we don't want them to just be doing sort of one-off activities. It's not, that image that I showed at the beginning of students just sitting in front of a computer doing like a single program. We want them to be progressing meaningfully through a sequence of activities that they're going to be doing, and also provide different opportunities within those that lesson for some choice and enrichment as well. And the best way to deliver that is with a hyperdoc. So I want to show you here one example of what that could look like. So this is a hyperdoc that's made in Google Docs. If you watch my channel, then you likely know that I often make my hyperdocs in Google Slides. You can totally do that. This is just an example of one that is built with Google Docs. The intention of this lesson, and actually when I taught this lesson as a full sequence that took students a week to complete, the idea was that they could basically do this entire thing completely on their own. So you'll notice here at the beginning that I have a place for a link to a tutorial. Now, one clarification here about this tutorial. This is not a tutorial that is teaching students about how to, it's not teaching students about new content or a new skill. What it's showing is an overview of everything that they would be doing. So what I would do here is I would go to a program like Loom. I have the Loom extension up here, and then I would just be recording my screen and giving an overview explanation of this entire assignment. So what I'm doing here while I'm talking about this assignment, I'm talking about the different learning targets. And oh yeah, by the way, definitely using a tool. So it's not just me talking, but I'm going to be circling and marking on the screen, talking about the different learning targets. And then I can also kind of anticipate where I see that there might be some different sticking points. So if I think that there might be an issue with a particular part of this lesson, then I'm going to be able to cover that, try to anticipate some of the different problems, give some explanations to try to make it a smoother process when they're actually going through and completing these. Now, you'll notice that in this HyperDoc, I obviously have links out to other places. So that's why it's a HyperDoc. And I'm guiding students, right? Facilitating them to go around. They're going to first go to a link to explore historical events, and then they're going to think about an event that they want to study, and so on. Next, after this engage part, I'm going to have students watch some skills-based videos about paraphrasing, direct quotes. You'll notice one is run through Edpuzzle, which I'll be talking about in a moment, and why you'd want to do that. And then applying that skill, and then moving on to a choice board where they're going to do some research and then actually answering these different research questions. And you'll notice it's pretty open-ended. They have quite a bit of choice here. And then they're going to finish up this particular assignment by making a video. And you'll notice here that I did actually post an explanatory tutorial. So this is more of a teaching tutorial to show them how to make their video in Adobe Spark Post. So they're making a video. And obviously in this case, this is like a fully independent lesson with a flipped classroom model. It doesn't have to be that way. At this point of the lesson, you could have everybody come back together. You could put students in groups. It's up to you and kind of your particular teaching situation. Okay, so I'm gonna stop for 1 second and answer a couple questions. So first question that I'm seeing here is, what app am I using to annotate the Google Doc or screen? Great question. That is today's show sponsor, actually, annotate.net, which I love because I can do that kind of stuff. And it's great for explanatory videos. And they have just very subtle things that I love, like the fact that with the eraser, you don't have to erase the whole thing, you just strike it out. So it's an awesome tool. Yeah, this is something actually that I'm going to get into in a little bit, Yvonne, about how long a flipped class should be. There's really no particular length for a flipped class. It could be a shorter period of time. It could be a longer period of time. What I will say, and actually this is already getting into one of my tips, is that flipping your classroom doesn't mean that you flip your classroom all the time. You're still doing it strategically. So that's a great question. Okay. Oh, that name is annotate.net. There will be a link. I'll make sure to get a link in the chat as well for annotate.net. It is a Google Chrome extension. Thanks, Wilson. Okay. And if you still have some questions, keep asking them. I'll be answering as we go through the show. Okay. So whoops, I still have my Loom video going here, but now I'm going to have my Loom video. I'm going to copy my video link. I'm going to go back to my lesson, and then I'm going to paste at the top my description of the assignment so that students can watch it. So again, this is not quite the same as like a video tutorial. This is my overview of the project. I do have some tips that I'm going to be giving a little in a moment about making videos in general. And then, so this is a HyperDoc that I made right now. although you can make your own, right? You can make a hyperdoc in Google Docs, you can make a hyperdoc in Google Slides. I would also recommend that you do your best to think of yourself not so much as a content creator, but as a content curator. So if you do all of your own hyperdocs and all that, I mean, that's great. However, if you are coming from a place of not having made those before, it's going to take you a lot of time. I'm going to be honest with you. It is a project that I really put together in my curriculum over the course of many years. Now, luckily, we actually don't need to go out and make all this stuff on our own. I will say, if you want some stuff like the one that I just showed right here, make sure to sign up. I'm going to put a link in the chat and in the video description, and I'll pin it to a comment as well, that I have this and a bunch of other of my hyperdocs that I give away for free. So you can grab those free resources. But there are also a lot of other places where you can get free resources. So one is Nearpod. Nearpod is basically just a interactive HyperDocs program. All of their lessons follow, for the most part, the 5Es lesson sequence, which you saw in my HyperDoc, and you can get tons of lessons that are already made on Nearpod for free. So as you're kind of looking through your curriculum, I'd go and see what's already on Nearpod. Another great place to look for lessons and curate material is hyperdocs.co. This is the official HyperDocs website from the folks who invented this concept of HyperDocs. And they have this program called Teachers Give Teachers, which I love. And if you go up here to find, you go to HyperDocs, you'll see that it has a whole built-in search engine where you can search for HyperDocs based on your grade level, based on your topic. That looks like right now they have 629 digital lessons on here. So this is also a useful place to go to find some HyperDocs that you can use. And then another place that's really useful to go to find instruction that's already been made for you is Khan Academy. Of course, there are lots of other places. The point I'm trying to make here is that we should not be focused so much on having to recreate the wheel, make all of our own stuff. You know, you don't necessarily have to make a video of yourself teaching in front of, say, a whiteboard or something like that, because so much content is already available online. So definitely make that shift. Think about yourself as a content curator rather than a content creator. Okay, I'll take a couple of questions. And yes, one's I see here, not a question, but a comment, that Nearpod for a flipped station is great. And particularly like in the model I showed for stations, you are going to have potentially different things you need to do in those stations, right? So it's definitely going to be to your benefits, not have to go recreate a bunch of stuff. So thanks, Carrie, for that comment. Definitely agree that you should be using these great resources that are out there. Okay, so third tip is that if you are going to make tutorials, you will, in a flipped classroom, need to do this, right? This is sort of the central component of a flipped classroom, that you need to make video tutorials. You have to teach students in an asynchronous way. Make sure that you're paying yourself forward when you make those tutorials. So try to make them, yes, specific to your class in that particular period, but keep in mind that if you do them, relatively well, you can reuse them year after year. So when I'm making a tutorial, even when I'm doing something like my video explanation that I showed, I'm still keeping in mind, how can I do this in a way that it's going to be reusable in the years to come? So that way, if you are making some content, what you're actually doing is building yourself a curriculum so that you have some tutorials that you can use in the future. So a lot of people think that when you are, running a fully technology integrated classroom, or when people say that you should do that, that means you need to be doing technology all the time. And I just want to show a quick example here. of how I have made a tutorial in the past. This is an actual tutorial. In fact, if you listen close, you can hear students in the building talking and laughing and yelling and stuff behind me, where I'm showing students just how to annotate text. And the only thing that's technology integrated about it is the fact that I'm taking a video of it on my phone. So this is my asynchronous tutorial teaching students how to annotate. I won't play the whole thing, but I'll play a little bit so you get an idea.
Unknown words, and I'm going to solve the meaning using context clues. So while I'm reading, I'm going to find some words that I don't know. For example, I see the word empire. I'm going to circle it. I'm going to mark this as a WW, which stands for word work. I'm going to use some words around the word empire to try to figure out what the word means. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. Latin was the language of the ancient Romans who ruled a great empire for 1,000 years. I'm going to see what I can substitute in for that word empire. So I'm going to look at ruled. Ruled a great what? I ask myself. Ruled a great city, perhaps? Ruled a great another word that is, I'm going to mark it word work.
Okay, so you get the idea that you can make these tutorials that are skills-based tutorials that don't necessarily have anything to do with technology. And then you have a bank of these that you can post. You can use them for intervention. You can post them up on your learning management system so that students can access them and watch them at home. You can have families watch them. So, I was before I was doing this, I was having students learn these different annotation skills, but that really wasn't being communicated well with families at home. Families didn't really know what I was expecting. But when I actually made a tutorial showing them exactly how I wanted them to annotate and the whole code and key that I had for annotating, it just makes it much more clear and transparent. So it's also about equity. It's about availability, transparency. So there are, again, a lot of reasons why you would want to consider flipping your classroom. Okay, so just showed a video that I made that has nothing to do, right, with actual technology, just a paper-based assignment. And I would still, just as a side note, encourage people to continue doing paper-based type assignments. Even if students are at home, they can still make a poster and then they can capture it on their phone and they can upload it to a program like Seesaw and they can annotate over it and stuff and kind of make their own little flipped classroom experience. So you can definitely still integrate the pencil and paper stuff with the technology. And I would actually highly recommend that you do that. Okay, so want to show a couple of other things that you can do in addition to just making a video tutorial. There are obviously some other programs that will allow you to do things like, go to my screen here, actually build out a tutorial on an interactive whiteboard and record it all at the same time. So this can be, I love digital whiteboards for the ability to walk through a lesson step by step. This is actually a new feature, as I was mentioning in the beginning, from Annotate, this program called Clips, which I really like because it integrates all these pieces into a single program. It has an ability to obviously annotate all over a screen, and you can have multiple pages where you're setting up an entire lesson. It can be a blank board. And then what you can do is turn this into a clip. And what this clip will be, we'll just call it untitled, ends up being your tutorial. You can choose to do it with voiceover. You can actually even have it include closed captioning. And then you can be marking on the screen, talking, adding text, teaching. So you're talking about the different parts of the tree, for example, and then you're writing in the different parts and teaching that as you're going, marking on the screen as well. So just another way to think about how you can build out a asynchronous lesson that is going to walk students step by step through what they need to do. And you just paid yourself forward because you just created this lesson that now you can reuse, right, year after year. Obviously, some other programs that are popular people, Loom, Screencastify for making tutorials. Like I mentioned, digital whiteboards. This is one option with clips. You could also use a program like Jamboard to teach a lesson, do your full instruction on it. Just make sure that it's recorded, and then you can post that up. Something that I would also love to hear about in the chat is what tools people have been using to make video tutorials. I know a lot of us have been making video tutorials. Do you like Screencastify, Loom, Screencast-O-Matic? Have people done any app smashing where you're recording yourself, kind of like I just showed here with clips, on other programs? So maybe recording yourself in Jamboard, or recording yourself explaining, like I did here, what people are going to do in this Google Doc. So it would be great to hear from other people. And if you have an idea about some different ways to app smash as well with a screen recorder, would love to hear about those, and we can learn from each other as well. Okay, so I'm going to take a couple of questions here because I see there are more coming through. And one of them is from, let's see, we have Roberto, and I'm sorry, that looks like I can't pull these onto the screen right now. So I'm just going to read out the question. This is from Roberto asking about the best way to use Pear Deck asynchronously when flipping a classroom. So the only difference is that you just want to make sure, if you're using a program like Pear Deck or Nearpod, that you are setting it up to be student paced, so that students are able to just do that on their own. So it's the same concept. You're basically setting up a whole lesson, but you're going to have students do that work asynchronously, right? So in many ways, thinking about this terminology that we've been using to describe remote teaching with asynchronous learning, those techniques are going to be very similar with a flipped classroom. And then Sherry is also recommending the Quizzes lesson creator. So definitely Quizzes now has kind of like a slide builder tool where you can build in and create all of your own lessons. So highly recommend checking out Quizzes as well for that purpose. Okay, so just gave the piece of advice to pay it forward, right? And my next piece of advice is to make all of your content interactive. So the reason why you want to make your content interactive is that it's going to address one of the biggest issues actually that comes up when you implement either flex instruction like this, or when you implement stations-based learning. And that's that if you've done this, you know it can actually be hard to hold students accountable for what's happening in those stations, for what's happening when they're doing their independent work. So if all you're doing when a student is over here doing independent work is giving them a video to watch, or an article to read, or a website to go to, you might have them do a note taker, but it can be very difficult for you to know on the spot. You're over here, right? And you want to have some flexibility. How do you know who's getting it, who isn't? How do students know on the spot if they're getting it, if they're not? That's where the interactive content stuff comes in. So interactive content also doesn't have to be just for tech stuff. You can pull in your own tutorials that are not tech related and make them interactive. And there you have tech integration that's kind of in a low tech way. So what do I mean by that? I'm here in Edpuzzle, and in Edpuzzle, you can create interactive videos. If you haven't done this, it's a must. You can look for any video pretty much that you'll find on YouTube that you want to teach the students. It's already been turned into an interactive video. I pretty much guarantee that, especially after this past year. So at this point, there's really no reason to actually assign students a video, a static video that doesn't have these built-in questions. But you can also bring in your own content. So you'll see here that video that I just made, and I just preloaded it because it takes a little bit of time. But if you go here to add content, you'll see that you have an option to upload a video. That's going to allow you to bring in a video from your computer, from your Google Drive, like I did here. So you'll notice that this is the same tutorial that I just showed you, teaching students how to annotate. I can edit this, and I can add questions to it. So
you use some
a certain place. If I want to do a little check for understanding, I can add a multiple choice question here so that students have to answer that question in order to proceed through the video. So whether it's a video on YouTube, whether it's my tutorial, it doesn't matter. If I have video content, I'm going to run it through a program that adds these interactive questions to it so that students have embedded checks for understanding. And I get to see the report in real time come through and see who's getting it and who isn't. Now, it's not just interactive video. There are all kinds of other programs now that basically allow you to make anything interactive. Actively Learn, again, if you watch my channel, you know I love this program. I believe right now they're actually offering their fully premium version for a period of time for like a demo if you sign up. But even their free version is very powerful. They will allow you to basically make anything interactive. You can make articles interactive. You can pull in web pages and make them interactive. You can also upload videos and make them interactive. And this will pull a report that is coming through in real time so you can see who's getting it and who isn't. And I'll get to that in a moment. So really important that we're using these interactive content programs so that when students are here, you know, in their station and doing some work, that they have some accountability for what it is that they're doing, and you can quickly check and you can see who is getting it right and who is not. So that gets me to my next tip. I realize I left a tip off there in my numbers here. So this is actually technically tip number 5, which is to embrace your shifting role. So when we're flipping our classroom, we're really becoming much more of a facilitator of learning as opposed to the central figure. You might even run a flipped classroom, which I've done this in the past, where I literally have students walk into the room, go directly to their station, and we might not have a whole group check-in until the end of that class period. I've even had some days where there's no whole group check-in. I'm literally only going straight back to my small group table and immediately starting to pull groups of kids when I know that that's the work that we need to do. So it might just look like this or like this, essentially the entire class where they're working in little pods and I'm just pulling kids, or we're going right into self-paced and I just immediately am pulling students to work with them in the back. So this is definitely a totally different role. It's a role shift. I'm never actually up there as kind of the central person in the classroom. And another point about what you want to be thinking about when you make this shift toward being more of a facilitator of learning is what you're doing over here. So, you know, you're here, you're away from students actually in both of these contexts. It's not that you're just, you know, sitting there and reading the newspaper, obviously, right? It's actually you're observing, but from afar, what students are working on. You are maintaining a strong sense of what students are understanding, what students are not understanding. So when I showed that report in Actively Learn, again, the purpose of this is I can see who's getting it, who is not getting it, and I have some interventions actually in my pocket and kind of ready to go. Now, the more experienced you become, the more you're going to be able to anticipate these kinds of issues and try to actually build those issues into the tutorials you make and into your lesson design when you're actually creating your hyperdocs so that you have less of those kinds of sticking points. But the reality is there are going to be sticking points when students are working in stations or when they're working in their self-paced. So you want to come to class prepared to have your eyes on the data, understand what's happening, and be ready to be pulling those kids over when they need some extra support, or if you see that they're really moving ahead and they need some enrichment, right? It doesn't just have to be for intervention. You can also, of course, plan these small groups more in a structured way where you just know that you're going to always be pulling for kids for a given period of time. And the idea is you're going to cycle through a group of students. So different ways that you can think about it, but very important that you have your eyes on the data, that you know what's going on so that you can intervene and you're not kind of in the dark about what's happening over here. All right, my Sixth tip is to flip your classroom strategically. So, what I mean by this is actually getting to a point that was brought up in the beginning, and that is that flipping your classroom does not mean that you have to flip your classroom all the time. So, flipping your classroom should be thought of really in a very similar way to technology integration in general. Technology integration does not mean that you do away completely with pencil and paper. It does not mean that you do everything with technology, everything is digitized. In fact, I love still using physical written notebooks, and students are, say, reading an article online, but they're writing in a physical notebook, not necessarily a digital notebook. So you can do technology integration without doing everything technology. Similarly, you can flip your classroom without doing everything technology. So again, going back to this model here, this part of the lesson is flipped here, and this might actually take, we might be in that part of the lesson for several days. This part is not flipped though. We're all coming together as a whole group for this part of the lesson. This part is also not necessarily flipped either, right? This could be something that, again, students are doing in small groups, doing all together as a whole class. That's just a more of a traditional model. So when you are flipping your classroom, you're looking for these strategic moments where you could push your instruction out to stations or out to your self-paced learning so that it opens up some time and space for you to be able to do different activities, for you to pull kids for any number of reasons. And I did mention that I would, talk about what this would look like in a more traditional model where you're actually having students do this work outside of class. Then it opens up the actual class space for doing your collaboration, doing your project-based learning. My personal thing with homework and flipping your classroom is that if you're going to do it, uh, you must do interactive content because you need to know, particularly when students are even farther away from you, what they are getting, what they are not getting. But even when I've done that, I have still had some difficulty around equity, and it's can be difficult to set up a classroom situation where your entire class is dependent upon students having done work, but then some kids come and they were not able to do the work for whatever reason, and then that kind of disrupts your ability to do things. So that's why I tend to prefer the in-classroom flip and trying to minimize, if not do away with, homework in general. Okay, a lot of questions coming through, and I'll be just calling them out. Again, apologize. I'm going to try to get my little comments feature up here again if I'm able to, but I may not be able to, in which case I will just, have to read them out loud. So, Carrie is mentioning, thanks, that premium for Actively Learn offered until June 30th. So, thanks, Carrie. Definitely recommend that you check that out. And there's also a comment, about from Georgia about Nearpod. So, and I'm assuming this is about interactive content. Definitely, you can make interactive PDFs. Oh, and I also forgot to mention Cami is a great tool for making interactive static or making a static document interactive. Nearpod has interactive video, also has interactive PDF. So definitely, Georgia, thanks for that. And Nydia, yes, so Screencast-O-Matic, another screencast program that you can use to make video tutorials. And Screencast-O-Matic is actually a good program if you're looking to do some more advanced stuff. So like what I have here with the green screen, or even my ability to put myself in front of slides. Screencast-O-Matic does have a chroma key feature. So if you're looking to do kind of get this effect, then you might actually want to look into Screencast-O-Matic rather than a more basic program like Loom or Screencastify. And yes, definitely Wilson has, Nearpod has Edpuzzle video feature. Absolutely. One of the reasons why I do like to have people go to Edpuzzle, I'm totally a Nearpod fan. And Nearpod also has a ton of pre-built interactive content. But one of the things I like about Edpuzzle is that because it has such a big user base, you can find so many videos. So, if you are looking for a video about any content really that you would be putting in front of students, just come check and see if it's already here. And like I mentioned, pretty much guaranteed it is, and it already has the interactive questions built into it. So it's good for coming and checking for that reason. Another reason is if you're just using all the free versions of programs, you're going to quickly run into storage issues with Edpuzzle, with Nearpod. So the way to get around that is that you piece them together. It's maybe not entirely ideal, like you want to, be able to go just in one place and have all your work in one place, but it is a way to get around the storage issue if you are only accessing the free version of your lessons. All right. Okay, so Jody is asking, can I flip between the lesson as a screencast to my face only with the green screen, screencast-o-matic with chroma key? Yeah, so Screencast-O-Matic has, I believe, different pay features. I'm not as familiar with Screencast-O-Matic. I do know they have chroma key. What I'm doing right now, where I'm flipping back and forth, is actually with streaming software. So I'm using a program called Ecamm, and Ecamm is what's allowing me to do this flipping back and forth. And you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that with Screencast-O-Matic. What a lot of people don't know, though, like with the software that I'm using right now with Ecamm, you can use this as a what's called a virtual camera. So let's say that, right now I were to log into Zoom. Ecamm is going to be one of my options when I log into Zoom. So I could, be essentially showing what I'm showing here through Zoom. So you can imagine, right? I can do things like put myself on top of my slides, things like that. So people are asking me, how to do that all the time. You need to have software that allows you to chroma key, which actually Ecamm does, so you don't even necessarily need Screencast-O-Matic, and you need a green screen and some cheap lights. That's pretty much it. I have videos on my channel if you wanted to check those out as well. And also, just a reminder, everything that I showed in this video, I have a video tutorial for. So whether it's Nearpod or Edpuzzle or Actively Learn, even Annotate, I have a video about it's called How to Draw on Google Slides. I have videos about blended learning, about hybrid teaching tips. I have a video where I actually walk through that HyperDoc that I showed and show all the sort of full product of that and making a video project with students. I'll make sure at some point I'm going to work on getting all those links in this video description so you can check all of that out if you want to use it as a resource. Okay, going to take a couple more questions here before I close it out. So if you have a question that I was not able to get to earlier, then definitely make sure that you drop it in. There's one question here a little bit farther back. Oh, it's related to Roberto's question about Pear Deck. But yes, this and Wilson responded, you can basically replace, if you think about it in your head, replace a lot of Nearpod lessons with Pear Deck. They have very similar functionality. You're right. And yes, I said Ecamm. I will also make sure that I put a link in the video description. Ecamm is streaming software. It's only available for Mac, so if you can't use it if you have a PC. The equivalent would be OBS if you have a PC that will basically do very similar functions. All right. So again, please be sure to put those questions in the chat. Oh, this is a good question. So all the way back to the beginning from Indira. So thanks for asking this, Indira. So this is Annotate what I'm using, and also thank you, Annotate, for sponsoring today's show and for being an awesome Google extension. Is Annotate free and then you pay? So Annotate, like the majority of Google Chrome extensions that have high-level functionality, is a freemium extension. So it has some features that you use for free, and then some that you pay for after the pay period is over. So like the draw tool, the erase tool, you can use those at all times for free. If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure the highlight tool becomes one that's part of the paid version, but it's still highly functional as a free version, and it sticks to your screen and does all kinds of things that other annotation tools don't do. So I love it. And again, thanks Annotate for sponsoring the show. Okay, so I would love to see everybody at my upcoming workshop with Bureau of Education and Research. It's already going to be next week. I know it's on a Monday and Tuesday, so that might be hard for people to make, but we had one a month ago, and it was amazing. I go over how to increase student learning with education technology. And though I do cover some apps like Nearpod and ClassKick and Pear Deck and Actively Learn, I'm sorry, no, Nearpod, ClassKick, Padlet, and Actively Learn, it's less about programs and much more about instructional strategies. Everybody who came to that workshop loved it. I had a great time. So I'd love to see you there. There's going to be a link as well that I'm going to drop in and put in the video description. And you can also get credits for that workshop. So another added bonus. If you want any of the resources that you saw in today's show, or you just want some free resources to help get you started, be sure to sign up for my newsletter. You sign up for my newsletter, you will also get updates about when I'm going live next for one of these free webinars, when I post videos, blogs, if I have upcoming appearances, and other news, as well as any resources that I'm sending out to the list. And I do have some upcoming exciting announcements that I'm going to be making very soon. And the first people to hear about those will be folks that are on my list. Lastly, I also just started a Facebook group called New EdTech Classroom Innovators. I would love to see you in that Facebook group if you're interested in sharing ideas and resources. Also, just networking with other teachers who are interested in bringing the technology revolution to education and learning how to strategically integrate technology in their classrooms. So I hope this show helped you see how flipping your classroom requires skilled instruction, and it's really about pairing high quality research-based instructional strategies with powerful technology programs. Don't let anybody ever tell you that teaching with technology means replacing the teacher. Far from it. It requires a skilled teacher who is orchestrating everything behind the scenes. It can be an effective model for really any classroom situation. I do think in particular, if you are in a hybrid concurrent situation, it's a model that you want to look at as a way to try to get out from under some of the difficulties that come with that particular model. So thank you so much, everybody. Look out for a video tutorial that I'll be releasing on my channel next Monday, and have a great rest of your week.